The flight to San Diego could wait. The encrypted presentation couldn't. I doubled back to the house in Lakeview, annoyed at the delay. I stopped on the stairs. His voice, he wasn't talking to me. He was boasting to her about how the board agreed I was too emotional, how my job, the company I built, was now hers. My name is Emery Bishop, and this was supposed to be a routine day. The gray Chicago morning pressed against the windshield, the wipers keeping a frantic, metronomic beat against the drizzle. I was cutting across town toward Midway, my mind already 3 time zones away in San Diego. The client, a private national security consortium, was Viridian Risk Dynamics' biggest whale. This presentation wasn't just important, it was foundational for our next 5 years of operations. As Chief Operations and Intelligence Director, it was my data, my analysis, my reputation on the line. As the founder, it was my company. My phone buzzed in the console, a text from my husband. Mark. Good luck in SD. Knock 'em dead. I smiled. A reflex. Mark, my anchor, the one who managed the chaos at home so I could manage the chaos for our clients. I was merging onto the Stevenson when my stomach dropped. Not nerves, logistics, my laptop, my specialized laptop, the gray, anonymous-looking block of metal with the encrypted SSD and the biometric scanner, the one holding the entire presentation. It was sitting on the credenza in my home office. I swore, loud and sharp in the confines of the car. I couldn't email the file. It was too large and encrypted at a level that our own servers would flag as a security risk if sent externally. I couldn't present from a different machine. The client's security protocols required this specific, vetted device. There was no choice. I signaled, cut across 2 lanes of traffic to the disgust of a taxi driver, and took the next exit, looping back north toward Lakeview East. The delay was infuriating. I'd be lucky to make a flight 3 hours later. I'd have to call Megan, my assistant, and have her start smoothing feathers in San Diego immediately. I pulled up to our brownstone, the engine still running. I grabbed my key fob, but the heavy oak door pushed open with a simple turn of the knob, unlocked. My hand froze. Mark never, ever, left the door unlocked. He was meticulous. The financial planner who double-checked every lock, every window, every night. It was a running joke between us. I was the one who analyzed global threat matrices, but he was the one who worried about a break-in on a quiet, tree-lined street in Lakeview. My first thought wasn't betrayal. It was threat. Had someone followed him home? Was there a problem? My training took over. I pushed the door open silently, my heels making no sound on the Persian runner in the hall. The house was quiet, but not empty. There was a presence. Then I heard it. From the second-floor landing, filtering down the open staircase, Mark's voice, but it wasn't his normal voice. It wasn't the warm, steady tone he used with me, or the professional baritone he used with clients. This was intimate and disgustingly triumphant. She'll be in the air for 6 hours. Tess, completely unreachable. Tess, not Tessa. Tessa Rowe, our head of communications. Young, ambitious, with a smile that always seemed stapled on. I stopped. My foot hovered over the 3rd step of the hardwood staircase. My entire body went perfectly, utterly still. My role as wife evaporated. The COO, the intelligence director, took its place. You don't move. You don't breathe. You listen. You gather. The board bought it completely, Mark was saying. I could hear the smile in his voice. The Emery's too emotional to lead a crisis line was genius, even if I do say so myself. Lang ate it up. They're all terrified of another female executive burnout. A woman's laugh. Light, tinkling. Tessa. She is intense. Mark, you just framed it for them. I framed it perfectly, he purred. They're ready for a change, a more flexible, younger face. Your position as interim COO will be approved on Friday. By the time she gets back from San Diego, her keycard won't even work. The air in my lungs turned to ice. It wasn't a crackle of static on a bad line. It was a total, deafening silence. This wasn't just an affair. This was a coup. He was stealing my company. The company I built from nothing. The one I'd poured my blood and my inheritance into while he was still a freelance advisor. I should have run. I should have screamed. I should have confronted him. Instead, I stayed on the third step, a ghost in my own home, and cataloged the facts. And the other thing? Tessa asked, her voice dropping slightly. The personal accounts. Done, Mark said, and the smugness in his voice was so thick I could almost taste it. I moved the main brokerage accounts and her mother's house in Evanston into the new private trust this morning. It's all protected. From her. He laughed. A short, sharp, ugly sound. If she flips out when she finds out about us, she'll try to burn everything down. This way, the assets are insulated. She can't touch them. The house in Evanston, my mother's house, the house I grew up in, the house my father left to my mother. Lillian. Clear and free. You're sure? Tessa's voice was sharp now. The voice of a co-conspirator, not a lover. Positive. I had her sign the transfer papers 2 weeks ago. She was so buried in that Qatar proposal. She didn't even read them. She just signed where I told her to. And then, the final, killing blow. The words that would echo in my head for months. She even thanked me, Mark said, his voice dripping with condescension. She actually squeezed my hand and thanked me for helping her mom get the finances sorted. The memory hit me like a physical impact. Me, at the kitchen island, laptop open, phone pressed to my ear, a stack of documents Mark had placed in front of me. Just tax optimization. For your mom. I'll handle it. You focus on the pitch. And I'd signed. I had signed my mother's home away with a grateful smile. The emotion that flooded me wasn't grief, not sadness, not even the white-hot rage I would have expected. It was emptiness, a vast, cold, pressurized void. It was the feeling of an operator who has just walked into a perfect ambush. I wasn't a wife discovering infidelity. I was an analyst seeing the full architecture of a long con, a meticulously planned corporate and personal sabotage, laid out before me, and I was the target. He had used my strengths, my focus, my dedication, my trust in his support as the weapons against me. He'd weaponized my own commitment. He'd painted me as too emotional to the very board who had watched me calmly negotiate a hostage situation in Bogota via satellite feed, all while he, my loving husband, was systematically stripping me of my company, my money, and my family's security. Tessa giggled. What if she forgot something? What if she comes back? She won't, Mark said, his voice moving, coming closer to the top of the stairs. She's already at the airport. She's predictable. She's on mission. I moved, silently. I lifted my foot from the third stair and placed it back on the runner. I retracted my hand from the banister. I walked backward, one step at a time, watching the open doorway as if it were a live bomb. I pulled the heavy door toward me, catching the latch with my thumb so it made no sound as it clicked into the frame. I was back in my car before my heart took its next full beat. My keys were still in my hand. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. My movements measured, not rushed. I drove 2 blocks, turned right, and parked on a quiet, leafy street. He thought I was predictable. He thought I was on a plane. He thought I was emotional. Mark had made 2 critical errors. First, he had underestimated me. Second, he had left his enemy, an enemy he had just created, inside his intelligence loop. He didn't know that I knew. The presentation in San Diego didn't matter. The missed flight didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the new principle of engagement, the one that formed, cold and hard as steel. In my chest. You do not let the enemy know he's been spotted. You let him continue his plan, and you use his own arrogance to dismantle him. I picked up my phone. I didn't call Mark. I didn't call my mother. I called Megan. Megan? I said, my voice perfectly level, betraying nothing. Change of plans. I'm not going to San Diego. Tell the client I have a family emergency, a severe one, and then clear my entire calendar for the next 48 hours. Mark is not to be informed. I found a sterile coffee shop in River North, all concrete angles and brushed steel, the kind of place designed for anonymity. I sat in a back booth, facing the entrance. My phone lay dark on the table. The severe family emergency message had been sent to Megan. Mark's "knock 'em dead" text still gleamed at the top of my feed, a nauseating artifact from a life that had ended 60 minutes ago. How had I missed this? The question wasn't an accusation. It was a data request. My mind, trained to find patterns in chaos, spooled backward, seeking the origin point of the rot. It stopped 6 years ago. Denver. A mid-level risk management symposium in a cavernous beige hotel ballroom. Viridian Risk Dynamics had just survived its first catastrophic year. I was running on fumes, caffeine, and the sheer, desperate belief that my algorithms for predictive threat assessment were better than anyone else's. I was drowning in a sea of gray suits, men who saw my analytics and dismissed them because I was under 40 and female. Mark Ellison was different. He was a freelance financial consultant, slated to speak on a panel I'd planned to skip. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room. He was safe. That was the word that came to mind. Handsome in a reliable, non-threatening way. Good hair, a steady gaze, a quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself. We spoke after my breakout session. I was explaining supply chain vulnerabilities in the Strait of Hormuz, and he didn't just nod along. He asked about the financial modeling. He understood the intersection of intelligence and capital. He didn't patronize me. He didn't try to explain my own field to me. He listened. In an industry where I felt like I was constantly shouting to be heard. Mark made me feel seen. It was an easy courtship. He understood the brutal hours. He didn't get resentful when I had to fly to London with 12 hours' notice. He seemed to admire the drive that exhausted most other men. Then, 2 years later, my father died. The suddenness of it hollowed me out. My world, which I kept in such rigid, operational order, simply fractured. I was trying to grieve, trying to hold my mother, Lillian, together in her house in Evanston, and simultaneously trying to land the contract that would finally expand Viridian into the intelligence for private sector's space. I was failing at all three. Mark stepped in. He didn't just bring flowers. He brought structure. He showed up at my apartment with grocery bags and cooked real food. He sat on the floor of my home office at 2 a.m, listening as I cried, not offering platitudes, just absorbing the shock. He drove to Evanston. He sat at my mother's kitchen table, a place my father had dominated for 40 years, and he patiently, gently walked her through the estate paperwork. He spoke to the bankers. He handled the probate attorneys. He was the calm, responsible force I was too fractured to be. We were married 6 months later, a small affair, in a private room at a restaurant overlooking the Chicago River. The city lights blurred through my tears. I remember my mother clasping his arm, her eyes shining with a relief that was almost painful to watch. She thought her fiercely independent, often abrasive daughter had finally found someone solid. She thought I was safe. I thought so, too. In the years that followed, Viridian exploded. My vision was validated. We went from 14 personnel crammed into a loft space to nearly 60, with satellite offices in Columbus and Phoenix. I was the chief operations and intelligence director, but I was also the founder, the brand, and the lead strategist. I was on planes constantly. Mark had folded his small consultancy and joined Viridian. His title was vague EVP of Finance and Strategy, or something similar. I thought he was handling the back end, the unglamorous paperwork that bored me. I believed he was managing our rapidly growing infrastructure. I believed he was protecting my interests. The memory of the signing surfaced, now tainted, sickening. It was 3, maybe 4 weeks ago. I was prepping for a major presentation to a new government client. My desk was a disaster of data printouts and threat assessment charts. Mark had slid a thick binder in front of me. "Just the family asset restructuring," he'd said, his voice smooth and reassuring. "Standard tax optimization. We're moving everything into a consolidated trust to shield it from liability, given the kind of work you do." I'd glanced at the signature page. Shouldn't I read this? He'd smiled. That safe, patient smile. I've read it. It's boilerplate. You need to focus on the presentation. I'm just protecting our assets. Protecting your mom. I signed. I trusted him. He was the man who held my mother's hand at my father's funeral. I never, not once, conceived that he would put his wife on record as emotionally unstable, to make her disposable. The emotional label. It was strategic. He knew the older members of the board were uncomfortable with my intensity. They preferred his smooth demeanor. He had taken my passion, the very fire that built the company, and rebranded it as a liability. The coffee in my cup was stone cold. I stared into it, and another memory, a sharper, redder warning flag, broke the surface. My mother, on the phone. Perhaps 8 weeks ago, I was pacing in an airport lounge, half listening. "Emery, honey, I'm a bit confused," Lillian had said, her voice thin. "Mark was here with some papers for the house. Something about moving the title into that new trust. He said it was for taxes." I remembered my response, a sigh, impatience. "Mom, it's fine. Mark is handling all of that. He's just getting our estate in order. Please, just sign what he gives you. I trust him completely. I have to run. My flight is boarding." I didn't just let him do it. I enabled him. I used my mother's trust in me to make her vulnerable to him. I looked up, out the window at the people rushing past on the sidewalk. My face in the reflection was pale, calm, but my eyes were calculating. This wasn't just cheating. An affair is a failure of impulse. This was a conspiracy. This was a long-range operation. Mark hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He had systematically infiltrated my life, identified my vulnerabilities, my dedication to my work, my love for my mother, and exploited them. He had leveraged my trust to stage a corporate and financial coup, all while sleeping next to me. My phone buzzed again, vibrating hard against the tabletop. "Mark, you must have landed. Call me when you can." I watched the screen go dark. He thought I was 3 time zones away. He thought I was preparing for a presentation. He thought I was the emotional, unstable wife he had so carefully painted me to be. He was about to find out just how calm, how stable, and how utterly cold my emotions could be when I was running an operation. I left River North and drove to the Loop. My movements precise, automatic. My mind was no longer a swirl of shock. It was a grid. I needed a secure location, a clean environment with high-speed internet, where my digital footprint wouldn't cross paths with Viridian's. I used a personal credit card, one Mark didn't monitor, to rent a small, glass-walled office in a massive co-working building on Wacker Drive. It was sterile, anonymous, and had a lock. It was a perfect tactical operations center. I sat at the cheap laminate desk, my back to the wall, and plugged in my personal laptop. I tethered it to a new, prepaid mobile hotspot, no digital trails leading back to me. My first call was to Megan Ortiz. She picked up on the second ring, her voice already stressed. "Emery, I thought you were in the air. The client in San Diego." "Megan, stop," I said, my voice low and flat. "I need you to listen to me very, very carefully. I am not in the air. I am in Chicago. I have a critical family emergency, but for the purposes of the office, and especially for Mark, I am in San Diego." There was a sharp intake of breath. Silence. Megan had been with me for 4 years. She was smart, discreet, and had seen me handle boardroom bullies and data breaches. She knew my crisis voice. "What do you need?" she asked. "My alibi is critical. You are to inform the executive leadership team that I've arrived in San Diego, but the client's schedule is locked down. I will be completely offline and unreachable for the next 2 days. Total radio silence. No calls, no emails. You are my only point of contact. Is that clear?" "Yes, Emery. Total radio silence." "Good. Now, I need intel. Use your personal email and send it to my private address, the one we used for the board retreats. I need the finalized minutes from every board meeting for the last 60 days. I also need every memo, email chain, an HR document related to executive restructuring or continuity planning from that same period. I don't care how deep you have to dig. Restructuring. Her voice was tight with alarm. Emery, what is this? It's what I'm here to find out. Megan, send me the files. Now. She didn't hesitate. Sending in 10. The files landed in my secure inbox 12 minutes later. I disconnected the laptop from the hotspot, creating an air gap before I opened anything. I started with the board minutes. 3 weeks ago, tucked between budget approvals and a quarterly review. Discussion initiated by M. Ellison regarding operational stability and leadership bandwidth. Concerns raised over C-suite stress responses and potential client-facing burnout. M. Ellison volunteers to draft a confidential assessment with an external consultant. The language was so bland, so sterile, it was murderous. He was framing my dedication as instability. Then I opened the HR file. It wasn't an HR file. It was a formal, 10-page report titled, Assessment of Emotional Leadership Risk in High-Stress Environments. My name was in the third paragraph. The independent consultant, who supposedly wrote it, was a firm I'd never heard of. I checked the document's metadata. Created by Mark Ellison, it was a masterpiece of corporate assassination. It cited 2 specific incidents. The first was the quarterly review 2 months ago, where I had passionately, and yes, angrily defended my intelligence team from budget cuts I knew would compromise their safety in the field. Mark had reframed my defense of my people as an unwillingness to make tough financial decisions. The second incident was when I had shut down a senior VP in a client meeting who was trying to scapegoat a junior analyst for a data error. My actions, which I saw as protecting my chain of command, were described as public displays of emotional volatility and creating a hostile work environment. He had been taking notes. For months, he had been cataloging my passion, my fire, the very things that built Viridian, and twisting them into liabilities. And then, the recommendation. The report concluded that I was a significant emotional risk to the company's stability and client relations. It strongly suggested I be placed on a mandatory extended leave of absence. The final page was the solution. The report coincidentally proposed that Tessa Rowe, head of communications, should temporarily assume the role of Chief Operations Director, her qualifications. She had a calm, partner-facing demeanor and was better suited to refreshing the company's image, not operations, not strategy, image. He had sold the board a board of mostly older men from finance and defense on the oldest, laziest trope in the book, the hysterical woman, the emotional founder who couldn't handle the pressure, and he had offered them a young, smiling, non-threatening alternative. I closed the report. The corporate betrayal was documented. Now for the financial. I logged into our joint bank accounts, not the main brokerage account, which I now knew was gone, but the secondary checking and savings, the accounts we used for household expenses, taxes, and travel. At first glance, it looked normal. Mortgage payments, utilities, wine clubs. But I filtered the transaction history by transfers. There. 2 weeks ago, a transfer for $20,000. 3 weeks before that, $30,000. Another, a month ago, for $25,000. They were regular. Just under the amount that would trigger an automatic bank alert. All going to the same entity. North Shore Holdings Group, LLC. I'd never heard of it. It wasn't a Viridian vendor. It wasn't one of our family holding companies. I did a quick search on the Illinois Secretary of State database. North Shore Holdings Group, LLC, formed 8 weeks ago, the exact same week my mother had called me, confused, about the house papers. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from a cold, clarifying rage. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over my mother's contact. I couldn't call her, not yet. I couldn't protect her until I had a weapon. I dialed Connor Vale. Connor had been my father's corporate lawyer for 30 years. He was semi-retired, sharp as a shard of glass, and fundamentally decent. He'd helped me draft the original articles of incorporation for Viridian. He despised corporate posturing and revered my father. He answered on the first ring, his voice a gravelly bark. Vale. Connor, it's Emery Bishop. I have an urgent, time-sensitive situation. I need to meet you, now, and it has to be completely off the books, absolutely private. Connor didn't ask why. He didn't ask if I was okay. He was old school. He heard the operational tone in my voice. My office has too many eyes. The library at the University Club. 3rd floor. 1 hour. The line clicked dead. I packed my laptop. The adrenaline was high, but the objective was clear. The operation was active. I had 48 hours. 48 hours until Friday, when the board would vote to make Tessa my replacement. 48 hours until Mark, believing I was safe in San Diego, would likely try to empty the remaining accounts or finalize the transfer of the house. In that time, I had to find out exactly what he had stolen, and how. I had to identify which board members were actively colluding, and I had to get concrete, undeniable proof of his relationship with Tessa and how he'd used it to compromise the company. My goal had shifted. This was no longer about saving my marriage. That was a casualty, a piece of collateral damage. This was about containment and neutralization. I wasn't just going to stop him from taking my assets. I was going to make the board see that this wasn't a leadership transition. It was a fraudulent coup. The meeting room Connor had secured was in a nondescript building on LaSalle Street, booked under the name of a long-dead client. It was paneled in dark wood, smelled of old leather and floor polish, and felt 1,000 miles away from the glass and steel aesthetic of Viridian. Connor Vale was already seated, a single file folder on the table. He looked exactly as he had for the last 20 years: silver hair, a crisp white shirt, and eyes that had seen every possible variation of human greed. He didn't stand when I entered. He just gestured to the chair opposite him. I sat. I didn't take off my coat. I didn't accept the water pitcher in the center of the table. Connor, thank you for coming. You said it was urgent and private. Emery, that combination usually means money or jail, or both. Both, potentially, I said, my voice flat. I'm being pushed out of my company, the one I founded, and my husband is actively stealing my mother's assets as we speak. Connor's expression didn't change, but his focus sharpened. He leaned forward, clasping his hands on the table. He was no longer a semi-retired family friend. He was the counsel who had built my father's defenses for 3 decades. Start from the top. Give me names. Give me facts. My husband, Mark Ellison, his lover, Tessa Rowe, our head of communications, and an entity I found this morning, North Shore Holdings Group, LLC. Connor pulled a slim laptop from his briefcase, opened it, and his fingers, surprisingly quick, began to type. North Shore Holdings Group, he murmured. Illinois Secretary of State. Formed. 8 weeks ago. Standard LLC filing. He paused, his eyes narrowing at the screen. Registered agent. Mark Ellison. Secondary agent. He looked up at me, his gaze flat and hard. Tessa Rowe. The air left my lungs. Just for a second. It wasn't shock. It was confirmation. The link between the affair and the financial architecture was now concrete. The board meeting minutes I reviewed this morning show that 8 weeks ago is exactly when Mark began building a narrative that I am, quote, too emotional to lead. He's papering his file, Connor said. It wasn't a question. He's creating a corporate justification to remove you, while his girlfriend, who is also his business partner in this new shell company, is positioned to take your job. Exactly, I said. But it's the assets I'm worried about right now. My mother's house in Evanston. Lillian's house. It's been in your family for 50 years. It's paid off. Mark had me sign papers 2 weeks ago. He called it tax optimization. He said he was moving our assets, including the house, into a new trust to protect them from liability. I was prepping for a major client pitch. I signed. I hated the words. I hated the admission of the mistake. Connor's face went grim. Emery, I need signature samples. Anything your mother has signed in the last year. And anything Mark has signed where his signature is casual, a birthday card, a note. I had anticipated this. In my brief, frantic stop at the house to pretend to get my laptop, I had also accessed the small personal safe in my closet, the one Mark didn't know the combination to. I pulled a USB drive from my pocket and slid it across the table. Scans of my mother's passport, her driver's license, and 3 checks she wrote to me last year. Also, the closing documents from our Lakeview house, which Mark and I both signed, and the card he gave me for our anniversary. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the room was the quiet click of Connor's keyboard. He pulled the digital record of the deed transfer for the Evanston house from the Cook County database. He opened the signature files I'd given him, placing them side by side on the screen. He stared, unmoving. "That's not your mother's signature," he said finally, his voice cold. "And it's not yours." "What are you saying?" He zoomed in, isolating the signature on the deed transfer next to the one on our anniversary card. "Look at the M in Mark, the way it loops at the bottom. Now look at the L in Lillian on the deed transfer. It's the same ligature, same pressure, same speed." He looked up at me, and his eyes were full of a quiet, professional fury. "He didn't even have your mother sign it, Emery. He didn't trace it. He just signed her name himself. This is forgery. It's clean, it's arrogant, and it's a felony." The word felony hung in the air. This was no longer a betrayal. It was a crime. Connor snapped his laptop shut. The time for investigation was over. The time for strategy had begun. "Here's our weapon," he said. "This isn't a messy divorce trial. This is a criminal complaint. We can go to the state attorney, but first, we have to freeze him. We can file an emergency restraining order in Cook County Court, a temporary restraining order based on forgery. A judge will sign it on the spot. We can freeze every account associated with North Shore Holdings and every joint asset he's touched. By 9 o'clock tomorrow morning." I nodded. "Processing. That protects the house. That protects the money. It doesn't protect my company." Connor raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "Mark's plan hinges on the board meeting this Friday. He's convinced them I'm unstable. When I file this injunction, what do you think he's going to do? He's going to run to the board, hold up the court order, and say, 'See, I told you she was hysterical. She's suing me. She's compromised.' He'll use my defense as his proof. He'll petition to have my voting rights as a founder suspended, pending a mental evaluation. He'll lock me out." Connor sat back, seeing the chessboard clearly. "He turns your shield into his spear." "Exactly. So we strike first, not at the assets, at his credibility." "Robert Lang," Connor said immediately. "Robert Lang." I agreed. Robert Lang was the chairman of the Viridian board, an old-guard defense contractor who valued stability above all else. I had saved his primary DoD contract back in 2018 from a catastrophic intelligence failure, a favor he had never forgotten. "Lang doesn't like drama," Connor mused, "but he hates being lied to. He hates being made to look like a fool, and he really hates executive-level risk that could poison the company's reputation." "You call him Connor," I said. "Not me. If I call, it's the emotional wife. If you call, as the lawyer who's known my family for 30 years and helped incorporate the company, it's a different matter. You don't frame this as a divorce. You frame it as a critical executive breach. You inform him, quietly, that Viridian's executive vice president of finance is currently under investigation for felony forgery and the systematic embezzlement of assets from a co-founder. You let him know that this EVP has compromised himself by installing his co-conspirator, his mistress, in a high-clearance executive role." Connor allowed himself a thin, grim smile. "You're not telling him Mark's a bad husband. You're telling him he's a catastrophic liability, a walking security risk." "Precisely." I stood up, my mind building the timeline, seeing it all as a single operational flow. Step 1. Mark and Tessa formed the LLC, the vehicle to receive the stolen funds. Step 2. Mark simultaneously begins the Emery is emotional campaign with the board, creating the smokescreen. Step 3. He leverages my distracted state, a state he engineered to forge my mother's signature and transfer the house. Step 4. He moves to install Tessa in my chair, securing his inside access and rewarding his co-conspirator. It was a tight, well-executed plan, but it had one fatal flaw. Mark thought his enemy was his wife. He had prepared for tears, for screaming matches, for divorce court. He had built a defense against a woman he saw as emotional and irrational. He had not, even for a second, prepared for a counter-operation from his chief of intelligence. I was going to dismantle his professional life first. The personal was just collateral. Mark's entire argument to the board, I said, buttoning my coat, is that I am too emotional to lead. I'm going to prove to them that the only person in this equation who can't separate his personal feelings from his professional duties is him. He's the one who risked the company's integrity for an affair. He's the emotional liability, and I'm going to make Robert Lang see it. Connor's call to Robert Lang was the surgical legal strike. Now I needed the internal asset. Brielle Sanders was our head of internal security. She was quiet, meticulous, and reported to me. I had hired her 3 years ago, pulling her from a mid-level analyst role. More importantly, I had protected her 18 months ago. She'd made a mistake, a false positive, in an internal investigation that nearly cost a senior engineer his job. The executive team wanted her fired. I stepped in, took the heat, and argued that her process was sound. Only her conclusion was flawed. I saved her career. Now, I was calling in the marker. I used a secure messaging app on my burner phone. Brielle, I have a critical, off-network situation. I need to see you, tonight. Your discretion is paramount. The reply came 3 minutes later, where I named a dark, old-school tavern in the South Loop, the kind of place with vinyl booths, 0 windows, and regulars who hadn't looked up from their drinks since 1995. She was there when I arrived, in a back booth, a full glass of water in front of her. Her face was impassive. She was in civilian clothes, but she still looked like she was in uniform. I slid into the booth. No pleasantries. Thank you for coming. Brielle? Emery, you're supposed to be in San Diego, she said, her voice a low monotone. The trip was compromised. I need to know what Mark Ellison has asked of you in the last 30 days. Her eyes didn't flicker. This was the moment. She could stonewall, claim executive privilege, and report me to Mark, or she could talk. He's my superior, Emery, she said, a non-answer. He's a subject of investigation, I countered, my voice as flat as hers. He asked you to pull my communications, didn't he? To build a file? Brielle took a slow sip of water. She set the glass down with a precise, soft click. 2 weeks ago, Mr. Ellison submitted a formal request for a keyword search on your company email account, citing a leadership review. He was looking for proof that you were, in his words, emotionally compromised and a potential liability. What did you give him? Exactly what he asked for, she said. A package of 3 email chains where you argued with the finance department about the Intel team's hazard pay, and the one where you told the VP of sales to back off your analyst. It was exactly the evidence he wanted for his report. My stomach tightened, but I kept my face blank. So you're working for him now? No, Brielle said, a flash of something hard in her eyes. I'm working for Veridian. Mark is sloppy, and he's arrogant. He thinks internal security is just a tool for him to use. He doesn't understand that the tool sees everything. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. He made a mistake. When he requested the keyword search on you, he also requested a blanket monitoring flag on Tessa Rowe's account. He framed it as wanting to see if you were harassing her. He wanted to see your emails to or about her. She paused. But the system doesn't just pull one way. The flag brought up his emails to her as well. He must have forgotten he was using the company server. An affair, I stated. A conspiracy, Brielle corrected. He saved them to a shared network drive, not his personal one. A folder labeled Executive Review. He thought he was being clever, hiding it in plain sight. I think he wanted a digital copy accessible in case his own laptop was ever compromised. She pulled her personal, non-company phone from her pocket and slid it across the table. The screen was open to an email, from Mark's executive account to Tessa's. Tess, it's done. The emotional risk report is filed. Lang and the others are buying it. Pushing her out is just the first step. You'll be in that chair by Friday. The board will eat up the image refresh angle. I scrolled to another. She's so focused on San Diego. She hasn't even noticed. She'll be gone, and we'll have the company, and the house. The clinical coldness I'd felt all day was finally pierced by a hot, sharp blade of rage. He had written it all down. He had documented his own coup. The emails are bad. Emery, Brielle said, pulling the phone back. Their motive, their proof of collusion. But that's not why I'm here. That's not the real threat. I looked up. What's the real threat? Brielle? I'm internal security, she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. My job is to protect this company's assets. Mark is a fool. He's a civilian playing spy, and he's going to get us all burned. What did he do? He's trying to impress her, his mistress. He's giving her gifts, and the gift he gave her, 3 days ago, was access. The blood in my veins turned to slush. Access to what? Tessa Rowe's user account was elevated to COO-level permissions. She now has the same security clearance that you do. She's a communications director. Emery, she doesn't have clearance. She hasn't been vetted for that level, but Mark used his executive override to grant it. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't about my marriage. This wasn't about my money. This was Viridian. What files? I whispered. She's been curious, Brielle said, her voice laced with contempt. In the last 48 hours, her account has accessed 3 items: Project Chimera, the Department of Defense vulnerability matrix we're auditing, and the complete, unredacted infrastructure and security analysis for the San Diego client you were supposed to be meeting with today. I saw it. A complete corporate implosion. This wasn't just a fireable offense. It wasn't just a lawsuit. This was a catastrophic, multi-million-dollar, potentially criminal security breach. He had handed the keys to our most sensitive kingdom active national security data to his girlfriend, to a PR executive. He's risking our biggest contracts, I said, my voice shaking with a fury that was colder than ice. He's risking our DoD standing. He's risking everything. For her. He's not just a bad husband, Emery. He's an active liability that could sink this entire company in a week. I was going to take this directly to Robert Lang myself on Friday. But then you called. You built this place. It seemed right that you should be the one to clean it up. I need it all. Brielle, I need the access logs, time-stamped. I need the full email chains with complete metadata. I need the server records showing the override he used to elevate her permissions. It's already on an encrypted drive, she said, tapping the small purse at her side. I assumed you would ask. She handed me a simple, black USB drive. It felt heavier than a brick. It was the gun. It was the ammunition. It was the whole case. As my fingers closed around it, my personal phone, the one Mark knew about, vibrated in my coat pocket. I looked at the screen. A new text from Megan. My blood ran cold again. For a different reason. Emergency. Mark just notified the board. The personnel adjustment discussion has been accelerated. It's not a discussion, Emery. It's a formal vote. They're convening an emergency meeting, Friday morning, 10 a.m. They think you're in San Diego and dealing with a family crisis. Mark is positioning this as a necessary move to ensure stability during Emery's absence. He's pushing for the vote to happen before you're back online. He was accelerating his timeline. He was pushing the coup through, using my faked family emergency as the exact excuse he needed. He was confident I was absent, grieving, and too emotional to fight back. I looked at the text message. I looked at the encrypted drive in my hand. He thought I was out of the game. He thought I was neutralized. He's not going to get a tearful, hysterical phone call from San Diego, I said, my voice a low, dangerous hum. He's not going to get a proxy vote submitted by an unstable founder. I slid out of the booth. the drive clutched in my fist. He's built his entire strategy around me being absent. He's counting on me being gone. I looked at Brielle. Friday morning, 10 a.m., I'm going to walk into that boardroom. He wants to talk about my emotional stability. We're going to talk about felony forgery and catastrophic data breaches. He wants the board to see an image refresh. He's about to get one. I walked out of the bar. My head held high. I had my allies. I had my evidence. And I had a deadline. The trap was set. Now, I just had to spring it. I had the legal case from Connor and the data breach evidence from Brielle. I had the architecture of the crime. Now I needed to detonate the conspiracy before the Friday meeting. Mark was the primary target, but Tessa was the accelerant. She was arrogant, she was sloppy, and she was high on her unearned victory. I needed to leverage that. It was Thursday night. I had less than 18 hours. Tessa Rowe, as Viridian's head of communications, lived a very public digital life. Her Instagram account was unlocked, a curated feed of networking events, cocktail bars, and inspirational quotes about leadership. She had posted a story 45 minutes ago, a selfie, holding a champagne flute, her smile wide and predatory. The geotag was unmistakable, the Harcourt Hotel. Magnificent Mile. The caption read, "Celebrating the next wave of Chicago leaders, so honored to be included." She was celebrating the theft of my job. I went back to the small co-working office. I changed. I pulled my hair from its usual functional ponytail into a severe, tight chignon at the nape of my neck. I put on a pair of dark-rimmed, non-prescription glasses I kept in my desk for long nights of reading data. I swapped my suit jacket for a plain black cashmere scarf draped over my shoulders. I was no longer Emery Bishop, COO. I was Ann Cole, a freelance journalist working on a story. My phone, with a fresh audio recording app open, went into my pocket. My burner phone went into my purse. The Harcourt lobby was a cavern of shimmering gold and black marble. The event was in the mezzanine lounge, a crowded, noisy space filled with the exact type of self-congratulatory young professionals Tessa aspired to be. I spotted her near the bar, holding court with a small group, her laugh just a little too loud. I approached her, adopting an air of slight professional confusion. "Tessa Rowe." She turned, her PR smile clicking into place. "Yes." "Hi, Ann Cole," I said, offering a hand. "I'm a freelance contributor. I'm working on a piece about the new wave of female leadership in Chicago's private security and risk sector. Your name was mentioned as a significant riser at Viridian Risk Dynamics." Her smile brightened. The hook was set. "Oh, wow. That's really flattering. I'm not usually the one in the story. You know, that's exactly why I wanted to talk to you," I said smoothly. "The operators, the analysts, they get the attention. But the people shaping the strategy and the image, that's the real power, especially for a company like Viridian." "It's so true," she gushed. "It's an incredibly high-pressure environment." Speaking of which, I heard whispers of a major transition happening there, that you're stepping into a significant operational role. That's a huge leap, from communications to operations. I watched her face for any sign of suspicion. There was none, only pride. "It is," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "It's not public knowledge yet. Actually, the formal announcement is tomorrow. I'm taking over, as interim COO. That's the role held by the founder. Isn't it Emery Bishop?" Tessa's expression shifted. She adopted a mask of practiced, somber concern. "Yes, Emery. It's a difficult situation. She's a brilliant founder, of course, but the company has outgrown her." "How so?" I asked, my voice neutral, inviting. I pulled my phone from my pocket, placing it screen down on the bar between us, as if to give her my full attention. The red recording light was invisible. "It's just the pressure," Tessa said, leaning in. "In this industry, you can't be emotional. You have to be able to make the hard calls without the volatility. Mark Ellison, our EVP, he's been the one really holding it all together. He's the one who saw that the board needed a change, A fresh image. She was parroting his exact words, the ones I'd heard from the staircase, the ones from his email. "So, Mark is your mentor in this?" I asked. "He's incredible," she breathed. "He has absolute trust in me. He's the one who championed me to the board. He said I was the flexible partner-facing presence they needed, instead of, the alternative." "It must be difficult, though," I pressed. "Managing out a founder, especially one who is so attached, so emotionally invested." "That's the polite way to put it," Tessa scoffed, taking a sip of her champagne. "Mark knew she would lash out, that she'd try to burn things down when she found out. He's a brilliant strategist. He protected us. He protected the company." "Protected you? How?" She smiled, proud of the secret she was sharing. "He's not just a corporate leader. He's a financial genius. He preemptively restructured the key assets. He even set up a new holding entity, I think it's called North Shore Holdings, to make sure the new leadership, to make sure we were insulated from her instability. He handled everything. The board will be so surprised tomorrow when they see how smoothly this all goes." She said it. She said the name. She had just confessed, on tape, to being a knowing participant in a conspiracy to defraud a founder and embezzle assets into a shell company. I had her. I let the silence hang for a moment, letting her savor her victory. "Tessa," I said. My voice changed. The warmth was gone. The fawning journalist disappeared. I use the voice I use when a field operation has gone wrong. She blinked, the smile wavering. "Yes." I picked up my phone, stopping the recording and sliding it back into my pocket. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I let her see my eyes. "What?" she said, her smile faltering, turning into a nervous twitch. "I'm surprised you didn't recognize me." "Tessa, we sat in the same executive overview for 6 hours last quarter." The color drained from her face. Her hand, the one holding the champagne flute, began to tremble. What did you say your name was?" "I didn't," I said, "but my name is Emery Bishop." Her mouth opened, a small, silent O of terror. "No, that's not. You're in San Diego," Mark said. "Mark said you had a family emergency. You're supposed to be offline." "The family emergency was here, in Chicago," I said, my voice barely a whisper, forcing her to lean in. "And you are it." I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, looking around for an escape, but I hadn't moved. "You just admitted, on an audio recording, to conspiring with Mark Ellison to defraud me and to move assets into an LLC called North Shore. That's the legal part. That's for Connor Vale." I didn't. He told me." "But that's not your biggest problem," I continued, cutting her off. "If I go down, Mark will serve you to the board as the scapegoat. He will claim you were a manipulative mistress who forced his hand. He will survive. You will not. But I have something he doesn't have. I have the server logs. Tessa." Her eyes went wide, the color of dirty snow. "Brielle Sanders is very, very meticulous. I have the exact timestamps of your user account accessing Project Chimera. I know you looked at the Department of Defense vulnerability matrix. You're a PR executive. You don't have authorization. You don't have clearance. Mark's override won't protect you from the client. It certainly won't protect you from the DoD when they discover a civilian PR rep was browsing their classified infrastructure analysis." She was shaking her head, tears welling. "He gave me access. He said I should get familiar with the portfolio. He told me to." "He told you to," I agreed. "He gave you the keys, Tessa. But you turned the lock. You committed the breach. And that's not just a fireable offense. It's a federal one. Mark is an officer of the company. You're just his girlfriend. Guess who takes the fall?" I leaned in, my voice cold and precise. "So you go. You run to Mark. You tell him Emery isn't in San Diego. You tell him I know about North Shore. You tell him I know about the data breach. You tell him I have the logs and I have your confession. You make him panic, because when he panics, He'll make more mistakes, and I'll be there tomorrow at 10 a.m. to watch him. I stepped back. Enjoy the party, Tessa. I turned and walked out of the hotel, not looking back. I didn't need to. I could feel the heat of her panic radiating across the lobby. As I stepped onto the cold pavement of the Magnificent Mile, I pulled out my burner phone. I sent the audio file to 2 people, to Connor Vale, with the message, motive, conspiracy, and confirmation of the North Shore entity. Add it to the injunction filing. To Brielle Sanders, with the message, target is compromised. Expect panicked digital activity from Ellison and Rowe tonight. Monitor all of it. Tessa would call Mark. She would be hysterical. She would be the very emotional woman he claimed I was. And Mark, sitting in my house, thinking he was safe, would finally realize the operation had failed. He was trapped, and he had no idea where I was. Friday morning, 9:55 a.m. The Viridian boardroom was on the 28th floor. A glass box suspended over the Chicago River, designed to project transparency and power. The long black marble table reflected the gray sky like a dark mirror. The board members were assembled, sipping coffee, checking their phones. At the head of the table, in the seat adjacent to the chairman's, sat Mark Ellison, my husband. I watched him for a full minute from the hallway, standing just out of sight. He looked magnificent. He was wearing his best suit, a dark charcoal number that made his shoulders look broader. He was the picture of calm, reliable leadership. He smiled. He gestured. He looked at his watch. He was performing the role of the reluctant, steady hand, forced to take the helm during a crisis. He had already briefed them on my family emergency. He was just waiting for 10 a.m. to strike the gavel on my career. Tessa Rowe was not in the room. She would be waiting outside, ready to be introduced after the vote had passed. At 10 a.m. on the dot, Robert Lang, the chairman, cleared his throat. Gentlemen, we have an unfortunate but necessary item to address this morning, regarding the continuity of operations. That was my cue. I pushed the heavy glass door open. The sound of the hydraulic hinge was the only noise in the room. It was a soft, expensive whoosh that cut through Lang's voice like a gunshot. Every head turned. The blood drained from Mark's face. His easy, confident smile didn't just fade. It cracked. His knuckles went white where he gripped his leather-bound portfolio. He looked, for one singular, paralyzing second, exactly like what he was, a thief who had just heard the homeowner's key in the lock. Robert Lang, who had received Connor's call late last night, was the only one who didn't look surprised. His expression was granite. The other board members just stared, their mouths slightly open. Mark recovered first, scrambling to reclaim the narrative. He stood up, knocking his water glass, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He rushed toward me, his face a mask of manufactured, loving concern. Emery, my God, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in San Diego. Is it your mother? Is she? Oh my God, what's wrong? He reached for my arm. I sidestepped him. I ignored his performance. I ignored his touch. I walked past him, directly to the head of the table, and placed my encrypted USB drive on the marble. Robert, gentlemen, I said, my voice calm and clear, filling the suddenly silent room. Thank you for gathering. I apologize for the last-minute agenda change. Emery, what is this? Mark tried again, his voice tight with forced panic. You shouldn't be here. You're dealing with a crisis. You should be resting. I am dealing with a crisis, I said, turning to face him for the first time. A critical, time-sensitive security and criminal breach. Here, at Viridian. I plugged the USB drive into the console. The large screen at the end of the room lit up. Mark, what is she talking about? One of the board members, a banker named Hayes, asked, looking confused. I don't know, Mark stammered. I think the stress. Emery, honey, maybe we should do this privately. We're long past that. Mark, I clicked the first slide. It wasn't a graph. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was an email. From Mark Ellison to Tessa Rowe. Tess, it's done. The emotional risk report is filed. Lang and the others are buying it. Pushing her out is just the first step. You'll be in that chair by Friday. The board will eat up the image refresh angle. I read it aloud. Each word was cold, precise, and amplified by the room's speakers. "This is," Mark sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red. "This is taken out of context. This is my private email. This is inadmissible, Emery. This is a personal matter. She's angry, gentlemen. She found out about the conspiracy." I cut him off. "Or about the affair, because I'm less concerned with who you're sleeping with, Mark, and more concerned with what you're giving them." I clicked to the next slide. This one was a data log, a spreadsheet, time-stamped, sourced directly from Brielle Sanders and our internal servers. "This," I said, "is a record of Tessa Rowe's account activity for the last 72 hours. As you know, Ms. Rowe is our head of communications. She does not hold a security clearance." I pointed to the first highlighted line. "Yet here, at 2:04 a.m. on Wednesday, her account accessed Project Chimera." The color drained from Robert Lang's face. "And here," I continued, "at 5:30 a.m. on Wednesday, she accessed the DoD vulnerability matrix. And here, just last night, after she knew I was in Chicago, she made one last, panicked attempt to access the full, unredacted security analysis for the San Diego client." The room was dead quiet. The sound of Mark's heavy, panicked breathing was audible. "Ms. Rowe's access," I went on, my voice cutting through the silence, "was granted by a full COO-level executive override, an override initiated by exactly one person." I turned and looked directly at my husband. "Mark Ellison." "No," Mark shouted, slamming his hand on the table. She wasn't. I gave her preparatory access. I was training her, bringing her up to speed. Because I knew Emery was a flight risk, I was protecting the company. By giving an unvetted civilian access to classified national security data. Lang's voice was a low growl. The judge had found his voice. "Mark, you have compromised this entire company. You have exposed our clients to a catastrophic breach." This was Mark's last stand. He was cornered. He had one card left to play. He pointed at me, his face a mask of desperate, righteous indignation. This is her fault. She's the liability. She's unstable. She found out about Tessa and me, and this is a scorched earth campaign. She doesn't care about the company. She just wants to destroy me. This is a domestic dispute, Robert. This is a family matter. She's hysterical, and she's proving my entire point." The word hysterical hung in the air, the final, desperate bullet in his gun. I held his gaze. I let the silence stretch. "He's right," I said quietly. "This is a family matter." The board looked confused. Mark looked, for a fleeting second, victorious. "It became a family matter," I continued. "When Mark decided to steal from my family, as of 8 a.m. this morning, my counsel, Connor Vale, filed for an emergency temporary restraining order in the Cook County Courthouse." Mark's face went from red to ashen. "The order freezes all joint assets. It also freezes all accounts and corporate structures related to a shell company formed 8 weeks ago, an entity called North Shore Holdings Group, LLC, an entity whose registered agents are Mark Ellison and Tessa Rowe." I clicked to the final slide. It was a scanned document, a deed transfer. The injunction was granted on the basis of this. "This is the deed to my mother's home in Evanston, and this," I said, pointing to the signature line, "is the forged signature of my mother, Lillian Bishop, transferring her home into Mark's shell company, a forgery so arrogant, he used his own handwriting." "Emery, stop," Mark whispered, all the fight gone, his voice collapsing. "Please, don't." I turned back to the board, to Robert Lang. "Mark Ellison built a case that I am too emotional to lead. He told you I was unstable, but the unstable person in this room is not the one who uncovered a crime. The unstable person is the one who committed felony forgery. The unstable person is the one who gave classified, client-level data to his mistress. The only person here who couldn't separate his personal, emotional life from his professional duties is him. He is not a leader, he is a liability, and he has exposed this entire board to shareholder lawsuits and federal investigation. Robert Lang stood up. His face was dark red. He looked at Mark with a contempt so pure it was terrifying. "Mark, you are on immediate, unpaid administrative leave. Surrender your keycard, your laptops, and your phone to security." He looked at his executive assistant, who was already on the phone. "Get Brielle Sanders up here, and tell security to find Ms. Rowe and escort her from the building. She is not to touch her keyboard. This meeting is over." The board members stood, scraping their chairs, refusing to look at Mark. They filed out, muttering. Mark just stood there, his hands flat on the table, staring at the screen, where the image of his forgery was still glowing. He was a hollowed-out building. The coup had failed. I unplugged my USB drive. I didn't look at him. I didn't say another word. I walked out of the boardroom, past the shocked faces of the executive assistants, past the security guards who were now striding toward the room. I had lost my husband. I had lost my marriage. But I had just saved my company. I hadn't cried. I hadn't screamed. I had presented the facts. The moral high ground wasn't a comfort. It was a strategic position, and I was holding it. The boardroom had been a battlefield. Walking out, I didn't feel victorious. I felt scrubbed raw. The immediate threat was contained, but the contamination was still spreading. I got into my car, the silence of the parking garage pressing in on me, and my phone rang. It was Connor. "Emery," he said, his voice grim. He didn't waste time on congratulations. "It's worse. I kept digging after our meeting." "How, Connor?" "St. Louis. About 8 years ago, a small private security startup. Your husband, Mark Ellison, was brought on as a financial consultant to help them scale. Sound familiar?" My blood chilled. What did he do? It wasn't a hostile takeover. It was simpler. He set up a series of vendor LLCs, paid them for consulting services, and routed the money back to an account he controlled. He siphoned off about $100,000 before the founders, a couple of tech guys, figured it out. Did they prosecute? No, Connor said, his voice tight with disgust. They were embarrassed. They were a startup looking for their next round of funding. They couldn't afford the scandal. They forced him out, signed a non-disclosure agreement, and ate the loss. He just disappeared and reappeared in Denver, at the symposium where you met him. I closed my eyes. It wasn't just me. It wasn't a marriage that failed. It was a business model. I was his biggest, most ambitious target. Emery, he's not just a cheating husband. He's a professional predator. I know, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Thank you. Connor, keep digging. Send me everything you find. I hung up, my mind racing. He had a pattern. He had a history. As I stared at my phone, it buzzed again. A blocked, unknown number. I almost ignored it, but my threat assessment instincts were now running my life. I answered. Hello? Is this Emery Bishop? The one who runs Viridian Risk Dynamics. The voice was a woman's, hesitant, with a faint Midwestern flatness. Who is this? My name is Kayla Monroe. I'm calling from Missouri. I think you need to hear my story. I used to be with Mark Ellison, 8 years ago. The air in the car became thin and cold. Go on, Kayla. He didn't just consult for that startup in St. Louis, she said, her voice shaking with an old, unhealed anger. It was my startup. He was my boyfriend. I was the tech founder. He was the finance guy who was going to make us legit. I gripped the steering wheel. What did he tell you? He said I was brilliant, a visionary, but that I was too in the weeds to handle the business side. He said he would protect me. He said he would optimize my assets, help me with tax strategy. She was quoting him. She was reciting the exact script he had used on me, on my mother. He created an LLC, she continued, And he said he was moving my personal assets into it to shield me from corporate liability. When I started asking questions about the vendor payments, he told our investors I was paranoid. He told them I was too emotional to handle the stress of a leadership role. I couldn't speak. I just listened to this ghost from Mark's past describe, in perfect detail, the assassination of my own character. By the time I uncovered the shell accounts, he was gone, Kayla said, her voice breaking. And he had told everyone I was unstable. I lost my boyfriend, my company, and my credibility, all in 1 month. I saw a rumor on a tech board this morning about a major shakeup at Viridian, and his name, I had to call. You did the right thing, Kayla, I said, my voice finding a new, hard strength. He's doing it again, but this time, I'm recording. Emery, please, she whispered. Destroy him. I hung up and sat in the concrete silence. This wasn't a divorce. This wasn't a corporate fight. This was pest control. My next stop was Evanston. The drive was a blur of cold, controlled fury. I was no longer a victim. I was an avenger. I had to face my mother. I had to tell her how my trust had been the weapon he'd used to harm her. Lillian opened the door, her face a mess of confusion and fear. Emery. What's happening? Mark called this morning. He was frantic. He said you had some sort of episode, that you'd flown back from San Diego and were trying to ruin him. He said you were unstable. He had tried to poison this well, too. I stepped inside the house of my childhood, the house he had tried to steal, and took my mother's hands. They were trembling. Mom, I said, sit down. We need to talk, and you need to listen to me very, very carefully. What Mark told you is a lie. What he's been telling us for years is a lie. I laid it all out. The affair with Tessa Rowe, the emotional risk report, the coup in the boardroom, the shell company, North Shore Holdings. She listened, her face pale, but her eyes, my father's eyes, hardened. And Mom, I said, my voice breaking for the first time. The house. He didn't just move it. He forged your signature. Lillian was quiet for a long time. She looked at her own hands, then up at me. He came here, she said, her voice quiet. 2 months ago, with those papers, he said, Lillian, Emery is so buried in that Qatar deal. She can't be bothered with this. I'll take care of it for her. I'm just helping. He said he was helping. The betrayal hit her, not as hysteria, but as a cold, sudden understanding. He used my love for you against me, she whispered, and he used my trust in him against you. I replied, which is why we're ending it, right now. I pulled a thick folder from my briefcase. Connor had prepared it, a new, comprehensive, ironclad power of attorney, a new will, and documents that revoked every right Mark Ellison ever had to our family's finances, property, or medical decisions. At the kitchen table where I'd done my homework, my mother and I signed, one by one, sealing the Bishop family line, cutting the rod out completely. As I was driving back to Chicago, my burner phone rang. It was him. I let it ring 3 times. I took a breath. I hit answer, and I hit record on the car's integrated system. Emery. The voice was not the concerned husband. It was not the smooth executive. It was a snarl. It was the creature I had just unmasked. What do you want? Mark? You, he spat, his voice thick with venom. You couldn't just leave, could you? You couldn't just take the loss. You had to burn everything to the ground. You destroyed my career. You destroyed Tessa. You did this, Mark. You did it when you lied to the board. You did it when you gave your mistress access to DOD files. And you did it when you forged my mother's signature on a deed. There was a pause. I was protecting our assets, he roared. From you, from your spending, your recklessness. I built a firewall. You were going to run us. And that company, into the ground. Tessa was the firewall, the one you were siphoning company money to, into your little North Shore account, the one you used in St. Louis. His silence was a confession. You bitch, he hissed. You think you're so smart. You just couldn't stand that I was in charge. You ruined that poor girl's life. Tessa is innocent in this. She's a kid. You did this to her. You did all of this just because you're unstable. Just like I said. Was I unstable, Mark? I asked, my voice deadly calm. Or was I just in your way? He laughed. It was the ugliest sound I had ever heard. A short, sharp, barking sound. You think those dinosaurs on the board would ever listen to a real reason? You think Lang gives a damn about operational specifics? My hand tightened on the wheel. Of course not, he sneered. The admission I had been waiting for. I just had to give them a reason they could understand. She's too emotional. It's the only thing that Old Boys Club would ever believe. It's the perfect excuse, and you walked right into it. I didn't even have to lie. Emery, I just had to label you. He had said it. He had confessed. The entire corporate takedown was a lie. A sexist narrative he'd spun to get what he wanted. Goodbye, Mark, I said. You're not going to get away with... I disconnected the call. I pulled over, my hands shaking, not with fear, but with a pure, distilled rage. I saved the audio file. I emailed it to Connor with a single subject line, The Golden Bullet. When I got back to my co-working office, my corporate email, now restored by Brielle, was flooding. The narrative at Viridian had flipped. The rumor wasn't, Emery had a breakdown. The rumor was, Mark committed a data breach with his mistress. The heads of departments logistics, field ops, data were all sending me quiet messages. We're with you, Emery. Glad you're back. Tell us what you need. They didn't care about the marriage. They cared about the breach. They respected strength. They despised the liability Mark had become. I looked at the audio file. I thought of Kayla Monroe. I thought of my mother's signature. The boardroom had been about survival. The injunction was about recovery. This recording was about justice. This wasn't over. I wasn't just going to get my company back. I was going to make sure Mark Ellison was prosecuted. He didn't just need to be fired. He needed to be finished. It was Friday evening. The adrenaline from the boardroom had metabolized into a cold, heavy exhaustion. Mark was on administrative leave, meaning he was fired. Tessa was gone, escorted out by security. The immediate corporate threat was neutralized, but the legal battle was just beginning. I was in Connor's office, the lights of the loop glittering below. He's panicked, I said, pacing. He just lost his job, his lover, and his reputation in one morning. He's also a cornered animal, Connor said, looking at a printout. The TRO is in effect, but it's Friday night, the full-scale freeze on an entity like North Shore, especially if he has funds routed offshore, won't be fully cemented with every bank until Monday morning. He knows this. He's a finance guy. He knows he has a window. He's going to run, I said. He's going to try to drain that account and disappear. The Cook County State's Attorney's Office agrees, Connor said. He had escalated my complaint from a civil filing to a criminal one the moment he had the forgery and the St. Louis case file. The Economic Crimes Unit has a flag on the North Shore accounts. They're waiting for him to move. The minute he tries, it's an overt act in violation of a court order. We can't wait for him to move, I said. We need to trap him. We need him to confess. We need him to walk into the cell. Connor steepled his fingers. What do you have in mind? He's desperate, but he's also arrogant. He still thinks he's smarter than I am. He thinks I'm emotional, that I'm reacting, that I'm not thinking. He'll believe I'm having second thoughts about the criminal part. He'll believe he has one last chance to manipulate me. I picked up my personal phone, the one he still knew. I composed a text message to Mark. My fingers steady. Mark, today was too much. This has gone further than I wanted. I don't want this to be a criminal case. I don't want you in jail. We can still handle this as a divorce. We need to talk. Before the lawyers open on Monday, meet me. Let's just talk. The 3 dots I typed were a calculated lure, a performance of emotional exhaustion. His reply came back in less than a minute. Where he thought I was cracking, he thought he could still win. The office, 7 p.m., my floor, no one will be there. We can be civilized. Fine, he replied. I looked at Connor. He's coming. Brielle is already there, Connor said, picking up his briefcase. She's setting up conference room B. It's the one we use for depositions. The audio and video are high definition and time-stamped. It is a 100% legal recording. As Viridian is the subject of an active internal investigation, you are a corporate officer, interviewing a suspended employee about a data breach and malfeasance. And you? I'll be in the observation room next door, Connor said. And I'm bringing a guest, the assistant state's attorney assigned to the case. They're very interested in what Mr. Ellison has to say. At 6:50 p.m., I was sitting in conference room B. It was smaller than the main boardroom, more intimate, and more confining. The table was polished mahogany. I had a single file folder in front of me. Brielle had done her job. A small, discreet microphone sat in the center of the table, next to a water pitcher. I waited. At 7:03, the door opened. Mark looked like hell. His suit was rumpled. He hadn't shaved. His eyes were red-rimmed and feral. The confident, handsome man who had charmed my mother was gone. This was the creature that crawled out from under the rock. He didn't sit. He paced, his hands scrubbing over his face. Emery, he started, his voice a hoarse attempt at reason. Thank God. Thank God you see sense. This is a nightmare. This isn't us. You can't listen to these lawyers. You're emotional. You're lashing out. I get it. I hurt you. He was trying to play the understanding husband. It was nauseating. You need to call them off. He said, his voice pleading. This injunction, this criminal talk, you can't. It's a mistake. We can fix this. We can just divorce. I'll walk away. I won't even fight you for my share of Viridian. Just call off the lawyers. Sit down, Mark, I said. He stopped pacing. He looked at me, surprised by the coldness in my voice. He sat. This isn't a domestic dispute, I said. This isn't about your affair. This is about your actions. I did what I had to do, he said, his voice rising. You were running the company into the ground. You were too attached, too sentimental. I was trying to protect it. I was trying to protect us. Is that what you were doing when you formed North Shore Holdings with Tessa Rowe? He recoiled as if struck. That was a financial strategy, a firewall. To protect assets from your volatility. My volatility, I repeated, my voice flat. I opened the file. I slid the first document across the table, a printout of his email to Tessa. The board will eat up the image refresh angle. You mean the volatility you manufactured? He stared at the email, his face pale. I slid the next document, the server logs. Or were you protecting the company when you gave her access to Project Chimera, when you let your girlfriend browse a DoD vulnerability matrix? He stammered, his eyes wide. That's circumstantial. I was training her to take over because you were unstable. Was I unstable, Mark? I asked. I pulled my phone from my pocket, hit play, and placed it on the table. His own voice filled the room, cold and sneering from the recording. I just had to give them a reason they could understand. She's too emotional. It's the only thing that Old Boys Club would ever believe. It's the perfect excuse. Mark stared at the phone. The blood drained from his face, leaving a sick, gray pallor. He looked at the documents. He looked at the microphone. He looked at the dark, two-way mirror on the far wall. He finally understood. This was not a reconciliation. This was a deposition. His mask didn't just slip. It shattered. He bolted to his feet, slamming his hands on the table. The safe man vanished. The predator was here. You, he roared, his voice cracking. You set me up. You think you're so smart. You recorded me. That's illegal. You can't use that, you goddamn bitch. It's perfectly legal, Mark, and I can. You think you've won, he sneered, leaning across the table, his face inches from mine. You think you've stopped me? That injunction is paper. It's Friday night. You think I haven't already moved the money? You think I won't drain that account by Monday? I'll be in Zurich by the time you can file a motion. You want to play dirty. Emery. I will burn you to the ground. I'll take my half of Viridian, and I'll take everything in North Shore, and you will be left with nothing. He'd said it, a confession of intent, a direct threat. Thank you, Mark, I said, standing up. I believe we have everything we need. What are you? The door to the conference room opened. Connor stepped in. He just looked at Mark with a quiet, profound disappointment, and he stepped aside. A woman in a severe dark suit and a large man in a detective's windbreaker entered the room. Mark Ellison, the woman said, her voice carrying the flat, unmistakable authority of the law. I am Assistant State's Attorney Pace. We have a warrant for your arrest. You are being charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud, felony forgery, and embezzlement. Mark froze. He looked from Pace to Connor. He looked at me. His entire world, the one he had built on lies and manipulation, collapsed in on him in the space of 3 seconds. He didn't fight. He didn't argue. He didn't even look ashamed. He did the only thing a true coward knows how to do. He pointed a shaking finger at the printout of his email to Tessa. It was her, he whispered, his voice desperate, whining. It was Tessa. It was all her idea. She pushed me. She wanted the job. She said I was too soft, that I needed to be strong. She seduced me. She told me to say you were emotional. She said it was the only way. It was her. I looked at him, really looked at the man I had married, the man who had cooked me dinner and held my mother's hand. He was nothing, a hollow shell of ambition and cowardice. There was no love there. There had never been. There was only calculation. I had been his biggest target, and he had failed. He's all yours, Ms. Pace, I said, picking up my phone and my file. I walked out of the room. I didn't look back as the detective told him to turn around and place his hands behind his back. I just let the sound of the law, the final, cold, inevitable click of the handcuffs, be the last sound I ever heard from him. The room they put us in wasn't a classic interrogation room. It was a soft room, a windowless beige box in the overflow of the Cook County building, designed to make witnesses feel cooperative. It just made my skin crawl. I was there as the primary witness. Mark was there as the primary target. He was sitting at the table when they brought me in, flanked by a public defender who already looked exhausted. Mark's suit was the same one he'd worn to the boardroom, but now it looked like a costume rumpled, stained, and defeated. His wrists were red. Assistant State's Attorney Pace, the woman from the office, entered, carrying a thick file. She didn't look at Mark. She looked at me. Thank you for coming in, Ms. Bishop. We need to formalize your testimony. Before she could continue, the door opened again. A uniformed officer brought in Tessa Rowe. She was unrecognizable. The polished PR executive was gone. Her hair was stringy, her eyes were swollen and red-rimmed, and she was visibly trembling. She looked, finally, like the child Mark had called her. When she saw Mark, her face crumpled in a bizarre mix of terror and relief. She started to move toward him, as if for protection. Mark didn't look at her. He stared at Pace. I told you. It was her. She manipulated me. She's obsessed. Tessa froze. She stopped walking. She stared at the back of his head. The betrayal was so fast, so absolute. It was almost elegant. She had been his co-conspirator for months, and he had thrown her to the wolves in less than 30 seconds. The traitors were in the trap, and they were going to eat each other. Ms. Rowe, Pace said, ignoring Mark and gesturing for Tessa to sit in a separate chair. You are here regarding a severe breach of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. We have server logs showing your unauthorized access of classified DoD and client data from Viridian Risk Dynamics. Tessa looked wildly from Pace to Mark. He told me to. He gave me the access. He said I needed to be ready for my new role. Mr. Ellison, Pace said, her voice cutting through Tessa's whining. She opened the file. You are being charged with the following felony forgery. For the signature of Lillian Bishop on the Evanston property deed, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, related to the North Shore Holdings LLC, embezzlement of corporate assets, and violation of your fiduciary duty, resulting in a catastrophic security breach against a Viridian client. The list landed in the room, each charge a heavy stone. Mark still wouldn't look at the prosecutor. He wouldn't look at Tessa. He looked at me. His eyes were desperate, pleading. He was trying to find the woman he had married, the emotional one, the one he thought he could still control. Emery, he whispered. His voice was raw. Please, look at me. We're married. We're still married. Is this what you want? You really want to see me go to prison? He was trying to make this about us, about the vows he had incinerated. He was trying to find the guilt, the old loyalty, the emotional weakness he had relied on for 6 years. I met his gaze. My heart wasn't pounding. My hands weren't shaking. I felt nothing but the calm, flat finality of a task completed. You stole my job, Mark, I said, my voice clear, precise, and devoid of any of the emotion he'd been counting on. You gave it to your mistress. You tried to steal my mother's home. And then you stood in front of my board and told them I was too emotional to lead. I leaned forward, just slightly. You were right. This is about emotion. And today, I am letting the law show you, and everyone in this room, exactly who is in control of theirs. The money, he stammered, turning back to Pace. The injunction. You can't. That's our money. Mine. From North Shore. Pace allowed herself a thin, cold smile. The war chest you threatened to take to Zurich. Mr. Ellison, it's frozen. The accounts were flagged. Your attempt to transfer funds late last night was denied by the bank and logged by our office as an overt act of criminal intent. The last door had just locked. There was no escape. He had no job, no money, no leverage, and no wife. He exploded. It wasn't a reasoned response. It was a detonation. He shot up from his chair, his defender flinching back. You, he roared, pointing at me, his face turning a deep, ugly purple. You did this. You couldn't just lose. You couldn't just let me be in charge. Could you? You always had to be the smartest person in the room. You think you're better than me? He was raving, the smooth, handsome mask completely gone, revealing the sputtering, insecure rage beneath. You think those old men on the board wanted you, he spat. They tolerated you. I gave them an excuse. I told them you were a hysterical, unstable bitch, and they were relieved women can't lead. Emery, you're too sentimental. You get emotional, and you burn everything to the ground. You just proved my point. His words echoed in the small, beige room. Pace looked at the digital recorder on the table. She looked at her colleague. Mark had just, on tape, confessed that his entire emotional risk assessment was a calculated, misogynistic fabrication. He had just handed them his motive, gift-wrapped. Tessa Rowe saw it, too. She saw he was gone. He was a drowning man, and he would pull her under without a second thought. She had to save herself. He's lying, she shrieked, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't me. It was him. He wrote the emotional risk report. He told me what to say. He told me to act concerned. He said the board would eat it up if I looked like a stable alternative. He planned everything. He told me to look at the files. He said it would impress me. It was all him. It was all him. She had just confirmed my entire case. Pace had heard enough. Mr. Ellison, she said, nodding to the officer by the door. We're done here. The officer moved in, pulling Mark's arms behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was loud. sharp, and final in the small room. I stood up. I watched them pull him to his feet. He was no longer the charming husband. He was no longer the confident executive. He was just a common criminal who had leveraged a marriage to commit a crime. He looked at me one last time. His eyes filled with a pure black hatred I had never seen before. I just looked back. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I didn't say goodbye. I had just finished my mission. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving the sound of Tessa's sobs and Mark's processing behind me. I didn't get my marriage back. I had never wanted to. I got my company back. I got my mother's home back. And I got the truth. That calling a woman too emotional isn't a diagnosis. It's a tactic. It's the last, desperate weapon of a man who is terrified of being exposed. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are listening from. So drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts. Please subscribe to Zoe Revenge Stories, like this video, and if you want to support this story, smash that hype button so more people can hear it.